Good morning and welcome to Identity Leathercraft. Today we're going to look at answering a question that came in this week, which was about how to join pieces of leather together, two pieces of leather together. I'm going to try and cover just briefly a couple of different techniques for different kind of leather thicknesses. And I'm going to drop the camera down just so that you can see close up what I'm talking about. There we go. So generally you might have seen things called butt stitch, so we're going to cover butt stitch. This would be where you've got two pieces of leather that butt up together. If I just open that, you can just see there. So the times you might want to use this, it's quite often used on cricket balls, that kind of thing. But say you were making like a cover for a flask or for going around a bottle, or around a steering wheel cover, that kind of thing, where you're going to wrap it round and you want those two pieces to join there. And it's called butt stitch because they are going to butt up, and that's how you are going to connect them. So I'll go through that in just a moment. So that's one method of joining them together. The other method that's quite useful is for doing, if you need to join something for a strap, if you don't have leather long enough for straps, or for a belt and you want to make a belt and you've only got kind of short length, so you need to put a length in it. I quite like to do it on the diamond slant, and I'll show you that method in just a second. What's happened here is I've skived the leather across both sides so that the thickness of the strap, there's no difference between the thickness. I think you should be able to see that. And if you get it right, the leather should just sit neatly. I think the eye is less drawn to this, so if you're doing that and that's going around your belt, then I think that's kind of can be a bit more discreet. But you can just use it and make a feature of it. So this method, I've just done some parallel stitch lines, and again it's been skived so that the thickness of the leather is even across the whole way. You can make this into a square. You could also use this as an opportunity, if you were doing it for a strap or belt, to perhaps take it over a bit further and insert a D-ring or some other fastening to make it part of the function and design, and that would also make it look more purposeful, if you like. So just starting with the piece on a diamond, if we do it on this veg tan that I've got here ready prepared, so it's been cut, I've cut it into the diamond so they would be like that together. And then what I want is I'm going to overlap them by about 7mm, so that's how thick they would be if I just did them as they are there. So I'm going to take some of the leather off. So what I've done is I've done my line with a knife. You can see that. I'm just using the precision craft knife, and I have put a new blade in. So I'm starting with a new blade, and you'll see why in just a moment. So I've put a fairly deep cut in, down probably a good sort of third of the way into that leather. And I'll show you why I've done that in a moment. If I put this one on top and butting up to that line, I'm going to draw where that's going to come to, and that's going to give me my line on the flesh side there. And again, taking my ruler, I'm going to just make a cut line into that. Now the reason I'm doing this cut line is so that I can work against it to lift off the leather. So I'm just going to slice with this knife. Now this is me not using, I've already used this knife on this, there we go. So go really, really carefully. You don't want to take too much off, but you just want to take some thin slices just to get it started like this. There we go. And if you always work away from your cut line, you'll know that you're not going to go and damage the front piece of the leather. So you can see that's beginning to come away there. Take a bit more. And I just want to get into that bit there where there's still some of that top pink layer showing. Just watch your fingers when you're doing this. And these centre bits can be the most tricky, so just go slow. There we go. Now I've got a fair bit of that off. You can scrape away at it with the flat of the blade as well, just to get more of the top going. It is a bit hairy, this. You end up with lots of little bits everywhere, so just bear that in mind. You'll need to clear up afterwards. Now I've got a fair bit of that going, so I've started to get that thinness. You can use things like these safety bevels. Again, putting a new blade in, they're not difficult to put in, they just slide in the back here, and to pop them out you just move them up. I tend to use the end of an awl just to push them back up out. So again, you can use this and just use it to take off more slices. Now again, go easy with it, especially if you've got a new blade in, because they will take off a fair bit. Now I tend to find with this method, with these, that they're great, but they tend to make the leather slope down a little bit away, which is why I like to use my knife to start with. Once you've done a bit of that, I've got some 120 grit sandpaper, and I just even it off. This also has the effect of keying it ready for some glue. Okay, so if I hold this up now, I think you should be able to see that it's tapering off and is thinner. I can definitely feel, you know, run your fingers across, feel if there's any lumps in it. And before you can always go back and go to it once you've done your other side and you've got them positioned and you can see whether they're lumpy. So I should have done this one earlier, shouldn't I? So I've got one to prepare earlier. So this is the precision craft knife that I'm using at the minute. Sorry, I'm a bit ambidextrous, but I hope that makes it easier for you to see on the camera. It's a little bit different when you're working from the back with the flesh side, because you've already got quite a bit of the fluff kind of coming up. So this is where the term skiving comes from, cutting away, thinning down, shaving off, which is where we get the term skiving off school. Not that I'm sure any of you did that. There we go, that's got that started. You do tend to lose your biro mark on this side, so just be aware of where you're going and try to stick to that. So again, you can see that beveler's taking a nice amount off. And then again, I'm going to go back to the sandpaper just to make sure I've got more of a line against up until that bit. That tends to be where it stays thicker. So that will just even it off. It's a bit messy, as I said. Let's move those out of the way now. Now I'm going to put my biro mark on just so that I can see where I'm going to put my glue. So I'm just going to redraw that on. I've just got some Phoebe's Leathercraft cement glue. But you can use the water-based contact cement as well, is good for this. You want anything that's got a strong bond. It's going to be stitched as well, but this is just for belt and braces, and also it holds it in position while you're stitching, so you get your stitches looking neat, and you keep your leather parallel and aligned when you're doing, so that it looks really neat together. Now what I don't want when I put these together is to have any of the glue squeezing out onto the flesh side. So I'm just going to grab a piece of kitchen towel, which I've thrown away. And just make sure that I'm rubbing it away so there's nothing too liquid that's going to squeeze together. And keep the towel handy, so if you notice anything coming out you can clean it off immediately. I'm going to squeeze those down. There's a little bit of glue, and again on the sides because you don't want it to affect when you come to do your edges. And this is where the mallet comes in handy, so you want to just give it a good tap down. This just squeezes any air out and gets it kind of bonded flat. So I hope you can see there that we've got kind of a join, neat join, but with making the leather look the same thickness as it goes across. From here, it's a bit tricky for me to do while this is still wet, but you would just literally put your stitch holes down, and you want to make sure you're putting them in on the side that's bonding over the leather, so that's where you're going to stitch through. So stitch holes in position. If I was to do that now while the leather's still tacky, it's just going to peel away. So wait for it to dry, put your stitch holes in, and then you can literally just saddle stitch or back stitch as normal, and that would join your two pieces together in the same way. And if you do that on your natural veg tan before dyeing, when you dye it all, again it will become quite discreet. So that's how to do the diamond method, and the same principle applies if you're going to do this method. You're just taking a straight line across and skiving across. And as I say, you can box that in or do two parallel lines like that piece there. So with butt stitch, where you're butting it up together, this one I've taken a small skive off, and the reason I've done that is so that although they're butting together, if they were to open a bit, instead of seeing what's behind, you're actually just going to see a little bit of the leather. And again, you can then glue that in position. So let's just do that. Okay, so that's going to give me a bit more of a fixture to start stitching. The other method that I think is a really good thing to do is to use some masking tape behind it. There is a really good YouTube video called Butt Stitch and Box Stitch, and it's covering a whiskey flask, and this is what he does on his, and it just holds things together while you're stitching, and then you can rip it off at the end. So And that's particularly true if you're just using this method where you're just pushing the two together up that way rather than the skived part. Then you want to put your holes in. And you want to make sure that your holes are level starting from there. So aesthetically you see your stitches lining down level together. Once you've done that, you'll need a stitching awl, a diamond tip stitching awl. And you want to push these holes a little bit open at a bit of an angle. And then it's a thread and 2 needles. And there are different methods of doing this, so you can use like a cross stitch effect by doubling it over, and that can be on the back or the front. But this method is the method that's used on the cricket balls and different things, baseballs. So I'm going to go from the back and come up. So I'm going across, oops, wrong hole. So same as you would saddle stitch, get your needles evenly together. You're going to go down the next hole and go across and come out through that hole. And again, don't pull on the very first one until you've got the next needle through. And now you can pull, again, don't get it too tight, keep flattening it down because you want them just to keep that butt stitch look. And same again, take the needle through. Keeping it pressed down as you work. And you get the idea. I'm just going to hammer it down flat. And I can show you. So you end up with a line of stitching, but actually it's being held together across the back. So you can see those lines across the back. If I was just to take this off now. I tend to not worry if a little bit's on the inside. Generally these are things, like I say, going around flasks and things like that. It's just going to hold it a little bit together if you get a little bit like there left, otherwise you can just unpick that all. But usually it's on the inside of something that you've fixed together. So for example, I'd use this technique to put around my bike handles when I got my new bike, because it didn't have very nice handle grips. So that's butt stitch. Sometimes you'll see things referred to as box stitch, and that would be where you've got more of a right angle going. So the principle is the same. You've got your holes going through, you open them at the angle, so you can see the needle coming out at sort of 45 degrees through the tip of the leather. And then when you go to stitch them together, it's going to end up being less of an angle of the thread coming through here. It's actually going to be going part way through the leather to create your box stitch. So box stitch is literally just because it is usually used for making a box shape. So it might be on the bottom of a dice cup or tankard. It could be just a pencil pot or anything that you're making like that, where you've got a base, or the base of a bag as well. That if you're making a sort of drum bag, then drum shape bag, then that would be a useful stitch to do for that. So the last method I'm just going to show is if you wanted to join two pieces of softer fabric, softer leather. Say for example, if you're just piecing together and doing patchwork to kind of get a larger piece to work with, or putting different colours together. So you can be very simple about it. I've got a piece here that I've cut. So instead of the glue, because this is softer leather, I'm going to use a piece of double-sided tape. I've got a very straight line there, but let's go with the beginning bit. So I've got my tape down. I'm just going to lift off the edge. Put my piece of leather to join and overlap. Now this is such thin leather, I'm not going to worry about skiving anything, because it's not really going to give it, let's just make sure there's not too much stretch as you place it down. So again, giving it a little bit of a bash just to even it out. Make sure it's kind of bonded. And I quite like this method because you don't need to wait for anything to dry. And then you're literally just gonna, you can mark out your stitch line, pop your stitch holes in as normal, and then back stitch or saddle stitch through. I tend to find when you're working across a centre piece like this, that back stitch is a lot easier to use. And this method can work well as well if you're putting pieces down onto a bigger fabric underneath, like a lining or an interlining, to get them pieced together. You can use that same method and go through onto the interlining and then stitch. And that would give you, I've used a fairly heavy thread on that one. I've just used the same thread, but just to show you. So I probably would use a lighter thread if I was, that's a 0.8 mil, the 1227 stitching thread. So you might want to use something more like a 0.5. Or finer leather, or you could use an embroidery thread strands waxed up. So I hope that helps you have an idea about joining some leathers together in different contexts. You can get all of these supplies, the Phoebing's Leathercraft cement and the contact cement, the knives, thread, chisels, everything I've used today is from the website www.identityleathercraft.com. Thank you for watching.